This unassuming little laptop hides a pretty big secret, and it could well be the future of laptop designs. This is the Asus Zenbook Duo 2024, and after using it for a few weeks, it's quickly become my new favourite laptop. So let's talk about it. Now first up, Asus did send this to me for review, however, this is not a sponsored video, all opinions are my own, and Asus don't get to see it before you do. So at first glance, it looks, and actually it functions, exactly like a standard 14-inch laptop, albeit slightly thicker and slightly heavier. On the outside, it's a nice matte design with these funky geometric lines. Open it up and there's a tasty 14-inch 3K OLED display. Under that, there's a fully backlit keyboard, which has a nice layout, although it is missing the media controls across the top, which is a bit of a shame. Keyboard is nice to use though, and there's 1.4mm of travel. The trackpad is good too. It's a decent size and it has all of the multi-touch goodness you would expect. So, just like any other 14-inch laptop then. Pretty much, there's actually very few compromises to using this just like a standard laptop. But obviously, that's not why we're here. We want to talk dual screens. Simply pop the keyboard off to reveal the second 14-inch OLED display. They're 3K resolution, 16:10, and they both look great. In theory, they should be completely identical. They're the same panel. I found that one of mine is ever so slightly brighter than the other, but it's not noticeable during everyday use. They're also both 120Hz, although they will dynamically switch down to 60Hz when on battery. However, you can disable this feature from within the included My Asus app. There's 500 nits of brightness, display HDR 500 True Black certification, and they hit 100% of the DCI P3 color gamut. So they're fast, accurate, sharp, and there's two of them. They're both also touchscreen too, which means they do function with the included ASUS Pen 2.0. Flip it over and on the back you've got the wide, metal and reassuringly solid kickstand, which you can open up to about 90 degrees. From there you can stand it up in either landscape or portrait orientation, and now you've got yourself a proper mobile go anywhere dual screen setup. Now, landscape mode, like this, one on top of each other, is where I'm most familiar, and I love this setup. This is the setup I use at home, so being able to have a laptop to take anywhere to give me an at-home kind of feeling desktop workstation thing is mega. So how does this all work? Well, the keyboard is held on via magnets, and overall, it's pretty secure. There's a little bit of lateral movement if you give it a bit of a nudge, but it won't actually slide off, and that's not noticeable in everyday usage. To actually remove the keyboard, you simply pinch at the top, lift, and it comes straight off. And the first thing you'll notice, look how thin this is. It's super thin and it's super light. It's actually really impressive that they made a keyboard that's actually nice to type on, so thin. When it's actually on the laptop, it connects via these pogo pins. So it is a physical connection, which means there's no latency and no battery life to worry about. It will also charge up when it is in place, and you can check on the battery life and the charging status from the included Screen Xpert app, which again we'll talk about in a moment. When it's actually off the laptop like this, it will automatically switch over to a Bluetooth connection. Now the battery life of the keyboard is really good, providing you remember to turn the backlighting off. With the backlighting on, you'll be lucky to get an hour or two of usage, which is not ideal, and that has caught me out a few times. Remember to turn the backlighting off though, and you'll easily get a full working day. Ideally, I think they should patch that so that it turns the lighting off as soon as it's removed, and then you can turn it back on if you want to. Fortunately, there is a Type-C port on the keyboard itself, so if you do run out of juice, you can give it a bit of a charge. You can obviously still use it while it's charging too, and it does charge pretty quick. The only real difference is it is now completely flat. There's no kind of fold out feet or anything you can prop it up with, so it's not an angle, it is sitting completely flush with the table or the surface or whatever you're on. That doesn't bother me too much, but I know some people hate a flat keyboard. The other downside, due to that lack of feet once again, is it's really slippery. This will slide around on the table when you're using it. I got around it by sort of wedging it up against the laptop, but it is important to note because it can be a little bit annoying. Then when you're all done, you can grab your keyboard, sort of chuck it back on, and thanks to the magnets, it should just align, connect, and do what it needs to do. Right, let's just put that down for a second. As soon as you remove the keyboard, the second screen will automatically and pretty seamlessly come into life. Now, generally, it is seamless. I have had a few occasions where there's some Windows jank and some of the toolbars haven't changed as you'd expect them to, but that was only on a handful of occasions. In terms of angles, obviously you've got the kickstand at the back and that opens up to a little bit past 90 degrees, while the actual main hinge can go just past 180 degrees. Combined, that gives you loads of flexibility to ensure that you can get it at just the right angle. It's all really quite stable as well. Thanks to that big kickstand, you're gonna have to do something pretty dumb to knock it over. However, I must admit there is a fair bit of wobble in this top display. Boing. Now there is also a bit of a gap between these two displays, but because they are identical, they are the same size, they sit pretty flush, you don't really notice it. It's not distracting or awkward to use in day-to-day life. And actually this setup with this top screen here is at a really nice height. You're looking straight forward at the display rather than looking down at a laptop display like you're used to. That gives it a much more of a desktop style feel, which I really like. I actually found myself using this setup even if I didn't really plan on putting much on this bottom display. There's actually a hotkey on the keyboard, which if you hit, it will disable this second screen, so you can use it like this, have it at a really nice height, while also saving some battery life because you've only got one display running. Or alternatively, you can just flip it straight over into your portrait mode, or desktop mode as Asus call it. I found myself going to this method when I was writing scripts. I'd have Word open on one with sort of a few tabs, maybe PDFs open on another, and it's a really, really nice way to work. If you've never worked with a portrait monitor, you're missing out because it is really handy. However, it must be said, it's not quite as refined in this layout. If you want both screens to kind of be flat, you have to open it all the way open and you don't get as much choice in terms of angles. What I'd actually find myself doing was I'd put this display right in front of me, nice and flat, and then I'd just bend this one round to fit. All my main stuff was on here and then the other bits are on this one. It's all still quite stable though, it's a bit wobblier in portrait mode, but still you're not going to knock it off anytime soon. Oh, and in this mode, this portrait orientation, you can't actually run the high performance mode in the My Asus app because this lower vent is now being blocked. Now, if you forgot the keyboard or you just didn't want to use it for whatever reason, you can use this with the inbuilt virtual keyboard. All you need to do on the lower display, 6 fingers, give it a tap and it will bring up the virtual keyboard. But it's exactly what you'd expect it to be. It feels like you're typing on glass. So there's no real feedback. It's not the nicest thing to use. It's handy in a pinch and it's good that it's there, but it's not something that I found myself using all that often, especially when you've got an actually really quite nice physical keyboard to hand. Now, rather than using that virtual keyboard, I actually found it made more sense to have it flat in this laptop mode and then just use the pen. It's really handy for doing any sort of doodles when this is lying flat on the desk. I don't do that much doodling, but every now and again I need to mark up a PDF or I need to sign anything, so it is handy to have. It is also just generally quite nice to use. It feels fast and responsive, especially when the screen is set to 120 Hz. The downside, there's nowhere to store this and I am always losing things, so it's not ideal. You do need to make sure that you take care of your Asus Pen. And it is also just worth mentioning that you can close it up without the keyboard, but you will end up with a bit of a gap. So if you did want to take it anywhere without the keyboard, you can, but I would be a bit more careful with it because I'd imagine it's not quite as durable without the keyboard. Now, last but not least, there is what Asus call sharing mode, but I like to call it battleships mode. You open this up all the way 180 degrees and then you lie it flat. Now in this mode, in theory, you can have 2 people using the device at the same time. You can either have this main display mirrored and then duplicated on the other one, which would be handy if you're watching a movie with someone sat opposite you. For example, it's a shame the hinge doesn't go all the way round into like a tent mode because that probably would be better, but this does kind of work lying flat. Alternatively, you can have it so that the 2 screens are doing 2 independent things. So you could have one person doodling away in Paint while another browses Twitter, for example. If you happen to have 2 Asus pens like I do here, you can have 2 people doodling away on either screen. That could also work in an office or professional environment where you have 2 people in a meeting. They could be reviewing 2 separate documents, looking at spreadsheets or PowerPoint or whatever they need to do. Now, I tested that with a handful of apps. Most of them seem to work, but Edge, for example, doesn't. It just gets really confused with the two different touch interfaces going on, so I can't guarantee that that will work with every single app that you try. As mentioned, that is all handled by the Screen Xpert app, which we'll talk about very briefly. It comes pre-installed and it's a little widget which exists on your desktop. Open it up and you can do things like set the brightness, either synced or independently of the displays. You can toggle on and off the virtual keyboard. You can keep your eye on the keyboard battery life. You can enable that sharing mode. You can turn on or off this cool motion wallpaper, which I really like, as well as doing some other stuff like creating little task groups or setting custom layouts for the two displays. Now, it's quite a neat feature, but I find the window snapping to be perfectly usable, so I kind of just stuck with that. There's also an on-screen number pad, handwriting detection, and this handy little touch hotkey app as well. So that pretty much covers all of that. What about actual performance? Well, this is the top end model with the Intel Core Ultra 9 185H with integrated ARC graphics. It's 16 cores, 22 threads, it runs at 5.1 GHz max, and it has a TDP of 35 watts. It will boost up to that 5.1 GHz, but it will use a fair bit of power and create a fair bit of heat, causing it to thermal throttle. However, it will then settle and maintain that 35-ish watts. That's all coupled with 32 GB of LPDDR5X RAM, non-upgradable by the way, and a 2 TB NVMe SSD, which is upgradable, I believe, but you have to take the entire back off, so it is a bit of a faff. There's this little panel on the back which makes you think the SSD is hot swappable, but it is not. Now, there's no dedicated GPU in here, and this is a relatively low powered device with that TDP of 35 watts, but the performance is pretty good. Running Cinebench 2024, I recorded a single core score of 106 and a multi-core score of 731. That puts it just above the entry-level Apple M3 in multi-core, but just behind it in single core. Still, not too shabby. The included SSD is pretty pokey though. Here's some read and write speeds for those that are interested. Now, from my point of view, it all just feels really nippy and it zips along quite nicely, especially doing that productivity admin kind of stuff. Then if you want to start to get some more creative work done, to my surprise, you actually can. It's not too bad, even when it comes to video editing. In Davinci Resolve, cutting stuff up on the timeline running at 1080p is a doddle. Throw some 4K ProRes on there, and it's not quite as smooth. You get the odd bit of delay here and there, but generally it's pretty solid. I tried some 6K anamorphic on a 4K scope timeline, and that does start to stutter, but once you knock the timeline proxy down to half, you're good to go. Now, things do slow down a bit when you start doing any of the GPU accelerated fancy stuff within Resolve, but it can still do it. You can still run things like magic masks, speed warps, face refinement, and all that fun stuff. It's all here, it's all working. Sometimes only a few frames per second, but the fact that it can do it is a win in my book. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this as a video editing first device, but it can do it. And having this dual screen workstation combined with, let's say, a speed editor to be able to chop some stuff together on the go is really, really cool. It's also great for photo editing as well. Lightroom is great because that has a really nice dual screen layout, and the performance in Lightroom, once again, is really quite good. The same goes for Photoshop. Now, I don't do tons in Photoshop, but it's got enough power so that I can make all the thumbnails with my stupid face that I need to make. And while it is obviously a little bit quicker when running on power, because you can run it in high performance mode, it's still pretty quick when running on battery. You can still jump into Lightroom, you can still mess around in Photoshop, and you can still get some video editing work done. And it's actually surprisingly efficient on the battery as well. Yo, Editor Alex here. I actually cut the A-roll for this video on the Zenbook Duo. It was a 45-minute long 4K ProRes clip. On performance mode, while plugged in, I created proxies, which surprisingly were really quick. They only took a few minutes. Then I unplugged it and set it to best efficiency and then cut away. It took me 52 minutes exactly, and within that time, we'd used 26% battery. So give or take 3 to 4 hours of editing on a single charge. Being on best efficiency, it was silent throughout, It did get a little bit stuttery at times, but it was perfectly usable. Switched it over to best performance, rendered H.265 4K using the Intel QuickSync, which took only 8 minutes to render the entire 21-minute timeline, leaving me on 66% overall. That's thanks to the included 75 watt-hour battery, which is quoted at 8 hours of typical work or 13 plus hours of video playback when just using the one display. For me, in the real world, when I was writing this review, sat in a cafe, had it in desktop mode, I did about 4 or 5 hours of solid work. I had Word open, a couple of tabs in Edge, a PDF or two, and I was listening to Spotify with some headphones in. And over the course of that 4 or 5 hours, I used a little over 60% battery, which means of actual typical standard work with both displays, you could quite comfortably manage about 6 hours, which I think is pretty good. Knock one of the screens off and easily hit 7 or 8 hours. You could easily do a full working day using it as a regular laptop. When the battery does run out, fortunately it does have quick charge, so you can charge it up from 0% to 50% in just 30 minutes. Full charge takes about 2 hours. It's also worth mentioning this. This is the charger, and it's dinky. It's just a teeny tiny little 65 watt Type-C charger. No big power bricks, nothing to lug around. This is it. Just this tiny little thing and a decent USB Type-C cable and you're good to go. Now it does get warm under usage, especially if you're performing any benchmarks or you're doing anything particularly taxing. All the heat builds up around this top area here, so it can become a little bit warm on the old crotch. Obviously, that's less noticeable when you're using it in the dual screen mode. Now, fortunately, that heat generally doesn't make it to this lower display. It always remains pretty cool to use. There's a slight area right in the middle which does warm up compared to the rest, but it still stays relatively cool to the touch, so it's still nice and comfortable to use. The fans do kick in quite quickly, especially on the high performance mode as well, but they are really quite quiet, so they're not too distracting or too noisy or too obnoxious or anything like that. So what else is there to mention? Well, the Wi-Fi is dual band Wi-Fi 6E and there's Bluetooth 5.2. The latter allows you to enable the LE audio for lower latency and improved battery life if your Bluetooth device supports it as well. In terms of ports, on the right hand side there is a full-size HDMI 2.1 port and an audio combo jack, while on the left we've got one USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A port and two Thunderbolt 4 Type-C ports, both of which are capable of supporting fast charging and up to 40 gigabits of data transfer. Speakers are by Harman Kardon, they're downwards facing and they sound okay. They're nothing too special, to be honest. They do get loud, but the louder they go, the more tinny they become and the less bass. So they're fine, they're serviceable, they're pretty typical laptop speakers. There's also a 1080p webcam above the screen, and you can use that to log in via Windows Hello. It's fine for a quick meeting or a video call, but don't expect too much more than that. There's no privacy cover or switch though, unfortunately, which is a bit of a shame. So, how much does all of this cost? Well, it's listed currently, this exact model, for a smidge under £2,000, £1,999, which £2,000 is still a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but by today's standards and considering the hardware, I don't think is too bad at all. So I think that pretty much covers everything, and overall, I'm a big fan of this laptop. While it's not the most powerful laptop ever, it's powerful enough for most people's needs, efficient too, and any faults you do find are quickly forgotten when you set up this. Just look at it, having a dual screen workstation like this anywhere you go, it's just too blooming useful. Thanks for watching, take it easy. I'll see you next time.